Did you know there is a master plan for humanity? And if you're thinking, well, yeah, of course, God plans out these types of things. That's not what I'm talking about. You'd be right. But the UN, the Dictators Club, this vile collection of gangsters, mass murderers, and tin pot dictators describing themselves as nations, has created a master plan for humanity. And they're blabbering about it to anybody who will listen. It's called the United Nations Agenda 2030, or the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, or the UN SDGs, or the 2030 Agenda. They've got all these different terms, but it is, as the head of the UN General Assembly described it at the time, Peter Thomas, this is the master plan for humanity. That's what they're calling it. The Secretary General of the United Nations called it the Global Declaration of Interdependence. And it is an astounding document. I encourage you to get a copy and read it for yourself. You can find it on the UN's website. Every government on the planet every national government on the planet, every tin pot dictator has signed on to this. Robert Mugabe, the dictator of Zimbabwe, said, oh, this is going to usher in this wonderful, glorious, brave new world. Right? Robert Mugabe, of course, being the mass murdering Marxist maniac enslaving the people of Zimbabwe until recently, almost right after he took power, he went out and slaughtered another tribe, the Matabeles. He was not pleased with them, slaughtered tens of thousands of them, maybe more. And he was, of course, put into power with help from Jimmy Carter, Henry Kissinger, and all the rest of it. They wanted to make sure that Rhodesia would fall and that the communists could take over Zimbabwe. They weren't happy with the black leadership that the actual people of that area elected, so they overthrew and ensured that Robert Mugabe would come in. Anyways, story for another day about the deep state, but this Agenda 2030, I want you to take a look at it because it is just jaw-dropping. They're talking about it's going to save Mother Earth and all countries have to implement this. And if you read it, you see that this is really an agenda for totalitarianism on a global scale. Goal number 10, for example, says that we need to reduce inequality within and among nations. So it's not enough anymore just to have national socialism, right? Which, we saw how well that worked out for the Germans. Not well at all, right? Adolf Hitler, of course, was the leader of the National Socialist Party. But now they want global socialism. National socialism is not enough, So they want to redistribute wealth. And, of course, when they talk about redistributing wealth, that appeals to people who maybe don't have the understanding that thou shalt not steal, and maybe people who are whipped up into a frenzy by envy and other sentiments they shouldn't be experiencing. But this agenda to redistribute the wealth around the world, they're really not talking about taking money from George Soros and the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds and Bill Gates. They're not talking about taking money from these people. These people are smart. They hide it all in the tax-exempt foundations anyways. You're not going to get their money. They're talking about taking money from you, poor and middle-class Americans, and redistributing it to the United Nations, the Dictators Club, and, of course, the dictators who have impoverished the third world with this exact ideology, this redistribute the wealth, share the wealth, equal distribution of the means of production. They're talking about redistributing the wealth to the maniacs who have impoverished the third world using exactly this ideology. People like Nicolás Maduro in Venezuela, the mass-murdering Marxist dictator down there. People like the Castro regime down in Cuba, now that Raul and Fidel are gone, but the same murderous totalitarianism continues. And you don't have to take my word for it. You can just read the thing, right? After it was adopted, the Communist Chinese government, they used every propaganda organ they had, their Communist Party newspaper, their Communist Party television stations. They said, we played a crucial role in developing this UN Agenda 2030. And they're not kidding, right? The former head of NATO, socialist Javier Solana, bragged that this was going to usher in the next great leap forward. He used George Soros's Project Syndicate to write a column and said, Agenda 2030 will be the next great leap forward. And I guess they're counting on most Americans and others to be ignorant of what happened during the last great leap forward. I'll give you a hint. Millions of people dead, right, from the last great leap forward under mass murdering Chairman Mao in China. We do not want another great leap forward unless, of course, mass death and concentration camps are your thing. So they're talking about some very dark ideas, and they know they're never going to convince older Americans that we should give up our private property, we should give up our families, we should give up our country. So they actually have a whole goal dedicated to education, or what the UN considers education. They say by 2030, all learners, right, every pygmy in Africa, every tribesman in the Amazon rainforest, every American homeschool family, everybody needs to be so brainwashed, they will not just accept sustainable development, they'll promote sustainable development. That's how brainwashed they want people to be. They need to promote sustainable development. And that's what they're saying in their own international agreement. Of course, Barack Hussein Obama said, this is an executive agreement. We don't need to actually get it ratified by the Senate. So this is now being implemented by the U.S. government, by the different bureaucracies. We got documents from the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, showing that they're still implementing this, even during the Trump administration. The lower level bureaucrats are. So this is going to be an absolute disaster. It is a push for global tyranny, and we need to oppose it. If you keep reading, it says governments need to change the way goods are produced and consumed. Right? Well, how are they going to change the way goods are produced and consumed? Well, they're going to control the way goods are produced and consumed, and we've seen that movie before too. It always ends badly. So Agenda 2030 is a really, really dangerous agenda. It's a dangerous international instrument. Fortunately, it has no legitimacy. In the United States, it was never ratified by the Senate. There's no such thing as an executive agreement. There's no constitutional authority for that. Even if it had been ratified by the U.S. Senate, it would still be garbage because the U.S. government can't grant itself new powers that were not authorized by the Constitution just by signing international agreements. And finally, it's a bad idea. Right? It's just a very bad idea. We know what they say they want to fight poverty with this. Well, if you want to fight poverty, protect private property rights. Get rid of all this sustainable development, crazy ideology, theology. If you want to know what the UN means by sustainable development, you can go to these conferences. I've been to a lot of them. In 2012, they had the UN Conference on Sustainable Development in Rio de Janeiro. I showed up and took some pictures. They had all these posters with a sick earth, and the doctor shows up. He says, I know your problem. You have humans. And that summit also was chaired by a Chinese communist, the Summit to Define Sustainable Development, 20 years after Agenda 21. So these people have some really bad ideas. The Agenda 21 book for children, they say the earth groans every time it registers another birth. These people are anti-human. It's that simple. They hate your freedom, they want to take your money, and they want to subsume your country into a global system. We got to oppose them. We got to expose them. We'll be back with more videos like this. I'm Alex Newman. This is Behind the Deep State. I hope you'll like, share, comment, all those things. Help us get the word out about this, because your freedom is at stake here. The future of your children and your grandchildren is at stake here. This kind of stuff is not acceptable. The American people were never asked, were never consulted about whether we wanted this, and it is now guiding policy in national governments around the world, regional governments around the world, EU, African Union, Union of South American States, Putin's Eurasian Union. It's being implemented even here in the United States of America. We need to put a stop to this. So again, I'm Alex Newman. This is Behind the Deep State. Thank you for tuning in, and stay tuned for next week's episode. Signing out.